and welcome to Smeg and the Femmes, a podcast to discuss Red Dwarf from a different perspective. I'm Emily. Today I'll be talking about Series 5, Episode 2, Inquisitor, with the help of my guest, Feline Ranger. Hi again.
Hello.
Hello. And this episode, of course, is much more in your wheelhouse, so to speak.
Yeah. You know I'm going to rant, don't you? You know I'm going to be unstoppable on this one. I'm going to be off on so many tangents that you're going to have to rein me in.
I will do my best. Before we get on to how interesting this one is regarding Lister, we do of course get the opening scene, which is pretty unusual as it's one of the few we get in Red Dwarf where none of our main four characters are present. So it's very unusual in that respect. And originally it was supposed to be a pre-credit sequence, and really I think it should have been. I mean, why not?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And I think this is probably one of the darkest episodes that the show ever did. And I think probably maybe on a par like with Sirens in terms of like the threat level to the crew and how graphic the violence is.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, of course, the antagonist here, is one of the most serious villains in the show, and I mean, really, we kind of get that straight away. I mean, obviously, the idea of this sequence is to set up what a serious threat he is, and it's obvious because I mean, Thomas Orman here. He quite obviously he doesn't get a chance to justify himself at all. I mean, the Inquisitor just barges into his bedroom and deletes him.
I know, it's so rude.
Yeah, to be honest, it's kind of unfortunate, the implication, because I mean, the version who gets deleted, I mean, he's a sort of tubby, bespectacled bloke, and his replacement is an athletic-looking, muscular man.
Yeah, there's some slightly shallow bias going on there.
I mean, there's a little bit of fat phobia going on there, and of course we get that later when the Inquisitor extremely rudely calls Lister a fat little human.
Yeah, I'm still angry about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's rude as hell. It just seems so petty for an immortal droid, I mean, come on.
Let's be honest, the Inquisitor is just rude, full stop, isn't he? There's no manners there.
There's no manners whatsoever. How rude.
Maybe the reason they pulled it as a pre-credits sequence is that maybe they thought it was too dark and it would sort of scare people off that, before the show had even started. Especially because the special effects are kind of, I say, some of the most graphic that we ever see within the show. That thing of, the skeletons being kind of vaporized. That, it's very rare that the show actually gets that graphic.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the skeletons, and of course, Lister using his alternates, dead hand to get through a door. I mean, it's very practical. Of course, I can't blame Crichton for being grossed out.
No, I've got more to say about that later on. I have a theory about that.
We should go in chronological order as much as we can. Although, saying that, but I'm just going to point out here that I mean it's quite obvious how blatantly flawed the Inquisitor's entire setup is. I mean, all you've got to do is I mean, okay, I'm just going to bring this up for the sake of it. All you've got to do is think about it. Surely somebody like Sebastian Doyle would easily justify his existence, because he doesn't think he's doing anything wrong, does he? So, Yeah,
no, the whole idea that everyone is judged by themselves is rife with flaws, isn't it? And of course, I mean, the show itself kind of sets that up, that when the Inquisitor initially starts to delete Lister and Crichton, he does so by initially sort of putting Rimmer and Cat out of the way, and the audience assumption initially is, well, of course he's deleted Rimmer and Cat because of course he would. And then it's the flip, isn't it, that actually, no, it's the two characters who you would think would be safe, who he's actually chosen for deletion.
Yeah, I mean, and of course the reason he gives is that they could have been so much more, I mean, which yeah, you could kind of argue with that, But I mean, then again, I mean, Rimmer does, later raise his standards, I mean, he goes off to be ace, so I mean, he wasn't right about that either, And even Cat, I mean, he develops, between this episode and the most recent one, The Promised Land, he does develop as a character.
Yeah, and I mean, all the characters develop over time, don't they? But yeah, so the whole concept of a person having to judge themselves is innately flawed.
Exactly, because
And
I mean,
it raises the question, did the Inquisitor ever judge himself?
it's a good question, isn't it? I mean, he should have, by his own standards, but obviously, I mean, I don't know. Well, I mean, maybe he did, because I mean, clearly he did seem to think, that what he was doing was justifiable and a good thing, So maybe he did judge himself and he passed him. Who knows?
It's all a bit metaphysical, I know.
Yeah, as Rimmer Inquisitor, so to speak, we'll say. But anyway, we should probably get back to chronological. So, I mean, after the sequence with the Inquisitor and Thomas Orman, we cut straight back to our crew and Lister reading the sort of the comic book version of the Trojan horse legend, which is funny.
Yeah. I mean, the whole thing about him saying, are you telling me not one Trojan? So, hang on a minute, that's a bit of a funny prezi. And as someone who has studied classics, I can tell you that actually there was a couple of them who did. That there were Trojans on the beach who kind of went, really not sure about this, and got overruled. So,
I mean, I'm
yeah.
glad to hear that actually, because I mean it's not something that I've studied, and I'm glad that some people had enough common sense to have their suspicions raised.
Not that it helped in the end, but we all know how the story ends. But yeah, there were a couple of Trojans who voiced concerns.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I mean, this is one of those. I mean, obviously, this sequence isn't sort of directly related to the plot, but it's a good character sequence, because obviously it shows the difference between Lister and Rimmer. Rimmer sort of looking down his nose at Lister, for daring to offer an opinion on anything military or historical related, and Lister's just like, whatever, it's my opinion.
And of course, if we're going to sort of refer back to Marooned, of course, Rimmer giving it all that about the works of Shakespeare and then revealing he's never actually read any of it, that, he can sneer at Lister reading the comic book version of the Aeneid, but, has Rimmer ever actually read the real thing?
Almost certainly not, So I mean, we all know that Rimmer sort of, poses and sort of more intellectual than he actually is. I mean, it's not a question. I mean, he's not stupid. I mean, I certainly don't think he's stupid. It's just, he thinks he has to pose as, brighter and better read and more intellectual than he actually is.
I could be wrong here, but I think actually the story of the Trojan horse comes from Homer's Iliad rather than Virgil's Aeneid, although it probably gets referred to in the Aeneid. I'm just showing off now.
I must admit, I personally have no idea because I never studied that kind of thing, so I will take your word for it. I
Um,
I probably foolishly assumed that Rob and Doug had done the bare minimum of research and at least knew which collection of myths this myth came from, but maybe they didn't.
I'm pretty sure Virgil's work came later, but it does probably touch on the whole siege of Troy and the Trojan horse thing, because it basically picks up at the end of that as Troy is falling. So
Yeah.
that's not important. I told you to rein me in. This is one of my tangents.
Okay, moving on. Of course, we go straight to the Inquisitor judging all of them, and we start with Rimmer. And the thing which occurred to me, I mean, this is we're getting straight back into Red Dwarf no continuity territory here, because surely he should offer the fact that he gave up the Holoship for Nirvana's sake as something he did that was selfless. I mean, really, he should.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, like, come on, Rimmer, it was only last week. Just, you know.
I did actually look up on the official site, and it turns out that this episode was actually recorded before Holoship. So I don't know. I mean, maybe that's why he doesn't refer to it, because they didn't know what order they were going to put the episodes in, you know. And it's again, it's the thing, you know, the self-contained stories where they don't refer to it, you know. But I mean, if you're going to have any kind of character continuity, the way they did end up being aired, really he should have mentioned that, but well, he doesn't.
But yeah, a big shout out to Chris, because this, I think, is one of the funniest scenes. That
I mean,
just,
it's both.
yeah, the way he plays it just cracks me up every time.
You know, the way he does sort of defer to the Inquisitor and sort of very politely says, "Well, am I going to get a fair hearing?" It's etc. etc. And then as soon as he realizes he's going to be judged by himself, it's like, "Oh no, I'm doomed."
But yeah, just the absolute, you know, the sneeriness that he does as, you know, Inquisitor Rimmer. Of the, in my heart, I've always tried to do good things. You haven't.
Yeah, it's just, you know, absolutely how precisely how Rimmer would judge himself, and or at least at this stage of the show, and unfortunately, and you know, I mean, it is kind of sad, you know, the way he admits he's nothing, you know, and probably fully expects to be deleted, and yet he doesn't get deleted.
I think
And
it's one
then
of those moments that we do see kind of a rare self-awareness from Rimmer, isn't it? That he's aware of his flaws, but yet he's still he excuses them within himself, because, as I say, he doesn't blame himself for anything that's wrong with himself. So yeah, this is one of those, you know, holding up the mirror moments, isn't it? When he's like, you know, I admit I'm nothing, but from what I came from, nothing is up.
I mean, yeah, that is a very sort of unusually sort of honest and frank line from Rimmer. He doesn't usually, you know, sort of get quite that vulnerable. Of
I mean,
course,
he's still not admitting. You know, he's still not got as developed as far as actually admitting that actually many of the things that are wrong with him are his own fault.
yeah,
But
no, he hasn't got that far. I mean, you could argue that he never gets that far, but well, it's debatable. I mean, he backslides sometimes.
yeah,
Then of course,
yeah, it's
because this is Red Dwarf, we move on to Cat and the complete utter contrast.
and again, just, you know, I'm going to go off on another rant here, but I think this episode, maybe because, you know, there's so much in series 5, so many good episodes, and, you know, so many good stories, that I think this episode gets slept on a lot. But there's so much in here that's just absolutely fantastic in terms of the comedy and in terms of the characterization, and just this sequence of scenes where they're all being judged by themselves, I think, is just like a masterclass in character comedy.
Really is. I mean, to be honest, you know, if you were introducing somebody to the show, you could just show them that sequence, you know, with all the 4 characters, and yeah, well, it wouldn't be perfect, but it would certainly intrigue them enough, probably, to want to watch more.
I think, again, maybe because it is one of the darker episodes in the show, that maybe it doesn't appeal to everybody.
My,
But it's one of my
that,
favourites.
yeah. Yeah, it is very dark. You know, what with Crichton cutting off the Inquisitor's hand, and we actually hear him yell in pain. You know, so I mean, that's unusually graphic for this show.
And the thing as well of the Inquisitor sort of crushing Crichton's head against the wall, it's quite a violent episode, and,
Yeah, I
you
mean,
know, the whole premise of it is pretty dark.
yeah, I'm such a wimp because I always look away during that bit, to be honest, because I don't want to see poor Crichton getting crushed against the wall. I'm such a wimp.
Yeah, I think, you know, as I say, there's so much in series 5 that's excellent, and maybe that, coupled with the fact that this episode won't be to everyone's taste because of the darker nature of it. But I think this
That is
episode
probably
gets slept on as to
me.
how good it is.
I think it is. You know, I mean, it is considered a very good episode, and you know, it's quite popular. popular. But unfortunately for it, it came in series 5, which is jam packed with high quality popular episodes. So it doesn't stand out as much. But that's probably it too.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this sequence where they're all being judged by themselves, I think, is just genius.
Yeah, it's great. Moving on to Cat. I don't really have much to say about Cat's argument because it's a classic Cat. It's pretty much what you
And it's
expect.
perfect.
Yeah,
It is inarguable.
he is correct. He does have a beautiful arse, so
Yep, there's no lie there.
Yep, you really can't argue with him. Love how cheerful he is about the whole thing as well.
Yeah.
Then
But
of
yeah,
course,
no, brilliant. But then, of course, it immediately switches then to that darker sort of thing with when Crichton comes in and
it's
raises those sort of philosophical questions of, well, how can any mechanical justify themselves and all of
they really
that,
sort
and that thing of,
contrast as well, and put them in the right order, to contrast for comedy and drama and so on. Yeah, Crichton's argument is interesting, because you could argue, that Crichton's argument actually does demonstrate that he has broken its programming, because he has done so to some extent, So really, by the Inquisitor's, standards, he should not get deleted, really.
No, but again, it's that reflection of that in Crichton's eyes, he hasn't yet broken enough of his programming. He hasn't progressed to that point. So it's Crichton's own perception of himself, isn't it, that dooms him?
I think basically it is, yeah. Although there could also be somewhat of an element of, it's notable that the two that the Inquisitor chooses to delete are the ones who challenge him the most. So there probably is that too.
Yeah, but again, this is going to be another one of my rants that I go off on. But there's so much throughout, every series of Red Dwarf focusing on Rimmer's character and Rimmer's neuroses, and the kind of standard take on the characters is that Rimmer is, very neurotic and unhappy with himself, whereas Lister is very secure and very content with who he is. And this episode, and later on in series 10 with Fathers and Sons, really kind of throw into sharp relief that that's not exactly the case. And
it isn't the case, is it? It's just that basically that Lister, is better at burying that kind of thing, under a facade of. Well, it's not completely a facade, Lister does have some confidence in himself, and I think he probably does have better self-esteem than Rimmer because that's not difficult, But he's he's still got his own demons, and. Yeah, and the way he, just completely refuses to cooperate with the Inquisitor whatsoever. I suppose it is in character. Maybe some people were expecting a long philosophical speech from him about, you got no right to judge me. But I think it actually works just as well to just say, no, fuck you, I'm not cooperating with this.
I think it's indicative of the fact that Lister is those neuroses that Lister has and that self-doubt that he has, he's very much in denial about. And that, again, it comes back again in series 10, doesn't it? That actually, when he's faced again with himself, with a version of himself that's saying to him, you're not doing enough, and the kind of surface Lister is very kind of like, you can't tell me what to do and all of this. But then there's obviously that denial there, that there's that part of him kind of, trying to sort of shake him by the throat and kind of go, you're better than this. But there is still that level of denial that he can't admit it even to himself.
Yeah, it's very interesting, obviously, for Lister fans, this is a very fascinating episode, because it's as you said, it's kind of, well, without getting too, sort of controversial about it. I mean, Rimmer does get a heck of a lot of focus throughout the show, and a lot of Rimmer-centric episodes, as you were saying. Lister does not get as many. And it's because Lister's character, I think, is viewed as less extreme and less of a goldmine for comedy. So I think that's probably part of it. But it does mean, that when that if you're more into Lister than Rimmer, you have less sort of material to go on sometimes, because he doesn't get quite as much of the limelight as Rimmer sometimes.
Yeah, and I do get frustrated because, like, I think even in series 12 in Time Wave, where there's that whole scene with Rimmer's inner critic, and even then there was a lot of kind of reviews that kind of said, we've seen this before, we know who Rimmer is, we know, what his neuroses are, and this is kind of a retread of old ground, really. And I was a bit like, yes, it is, and I felt sort of vindicated reading those kind of other reviews.
To be honest, I mean, it would be
I was
more
like,
interesting if it had been Lister they'd focused in on. But I mean, of course, obviously, Time Wave is pretty much a disaster of an episode, So I mean, even if they had done so, it probably wouldn't be much better in that case, But you're right, I mean, Doug, is Doug, in the Dave era, does kind of go over all ground a bit too much regarding Rimmer, when Lister is right there, and could use more character exploration.
As well, and okay, I'm going off on a bit of a rant here, but we know so much about Rimmer's background, and we know the names of all his brothers and his uncles and even some of his cousins, whereas we don't even know the name of Lister's grandmother.
I mean,
or
it's a bit
or the adoptive parents he had.
It's a bit ridiculous that it's quite that vague, that we know nothing about his foster mother and his foster father, apart from the fact that his foster dad died when he was 6. I mean, that's literally practically all we know. I mean, it's a bit ridiculous, really, when you think of it in that way.
This whole, it's frustrating when there's this whole seam of kind of untapped trauma of Lister's past that never really gets explored, whereas we pick over the bones of Rimmer's childhood trauma pretty much every other week.
I mean, I know part of it is that Lister sort of is supposed to be the strong one and the leader, the sort of to some extent, I mean, amongst the crew, so I mean, if he sort of breaks down psychologically, then it sort of leaves them kind of lost, and also it's not funny, so I mean, there is that to some extent.
I think, again, you've hit the nail on the head that it's not funny, and with Rimmer, it's okay to kind of, keep hitting him because we're not supposed to like Rimmer the same way we're supposed to like Lister. And, Rimmer is such a jerk that, when we, talk about the bad things that have happened to him, it adds pathos to him. It makes him more likable. But at the same time, it's funny because, Rimmer's not particularly likable. Whereas with Lister, going over anything sort of bad that's happened to him feels a little bit like kicking a puppy.
It does, yeah. I mean, he's got such a puppy dog eyes, and he cries so beautifully, and it's like, no, don't, I can't bear it, I mean, Back to Earth is hard to watch in places.
And there's that sense as well that Lister is in many ways a more complex character than Rimmer, even though on the surface of it he seems more simplistic and more straightforward, because there is a vulnerability there that has been explored a little bit in things like Back to Earth. But it's that thing that he has the tougher veneer than Rimmer does. But it's what happens underneath that veneer that this is one of those few episodes that actually digs into that.
Yes, definitely. I mean, you say, I mean, we know a lot more about Rimmer than we do about Lister, and it's just, well, I mean, I suppose there's still time, I mean, you never know, maybe Rob and Doug will finally sort out their differences and bring us more Red Dwarf, or maybe they won't. We'll have to see.
Yeah, there's still time. We're still holding out for it.
There is, I mean, they did, we did get some TPL a mere 2 years ago, and it was really good. So you never know. But anyway,
I think until one of the main cast actually dies, I think we're going to continue maintaining that hope.
to hold out hope. Yes, exactly. Okay, but anyway, moving on, because I don't want to overrun our time too much. Yeah, to the scene of Crichton, giving them the exposition and explaining who the Inquisitor is, and which sort of struck me here was, Holly actually asks, who is he? What's his beef? I mean, why wouldn't Holly, if about the Inquisitor, if Crichton knows, it just seems a bit odd.
And the thing that struck me was like, when has Crichton ever been sort of around a campfire drinking with hardened space dogs?
No, it is kind of out of character, isn't it? I mean, it's so funny the way
the girls on the Nova 5 didn't seem like the hardened space dog types.
Not really. No, I mean, I mentioned it. I mean, it seems completely out of character, but I mean, it's so funny the way he delivers it. It doesn't matter too much. It doesn't really make that much sense. I mean, I think actually, if anyone's going to know about the Inquisitor, it will be Holly rather than Crichton. But well, I'm not going to go off on one again, because we've got too much to talk about. But but this is just continuing a pattern in series 5. Which where poor Hattie, is sort of on screen in the background, and in some cases, Crichton is literally sort of blocking her, so you can barely see her, and she's acting away in the background as best she can, but doesn't get many lines, and he's delivering all the exposition which would previously have been hers, and it just kind of makes me annoyed, but well, whatever.
And Holly doesn't get judged.
It's a good point, actually. I mean, maybe
computers don't count.
Yeah, I assume computers don't count. I mean, because that kind of makes sense. Because I mean, mechanoids are one thing, but actual computers are kind of different. But then again, really considering how humanized Holly is, he, she, they, however you want to refer to Holly, probably should have been judged. But obviously it's a good thing for plot purposes that they weren't, I suppose.
What is the metaphysical differentiation between robot and computer?
That is a good question, which I cannot possibly answer.
We don't have long enough for that.
We should probably move on. Yeah, just moving on to So we get poor Lister and Crichton, being deleted, and and then suddenly future Crichton appears, and we get this gruesome sequence where he cuts off the Inquisitor's hand, and then the Inquisitor crushes him into a wall, and which he pointed out is unusually violent for this show.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, isn't it, that they've still injected the humour into it, of the whole, oh yes, and now the Inquisitor jumps me from behind like this. It's
just funny.
Yeah, it's still got that Red Dwarf absurdity in it, but yeah, it is actually pretty dark.
Yes, it really is, but at least it does establish, that Lister and Crichton potentially have a way of getting out of this, and then of course they run off and they encounter the new Cat and Rimmer. I don't know if they are actually new, but I'm going to call them new Cat and Rimmer because it just to distinguish them. And I don't know if it's just a situation, the fact that they're confronting people they don't know, but they seem a little friendlier with each other than our usual versions, or I don't know, maybe I'm imagining it.
Yeah, they're presenting more of a united front than they would normally.
Yeah, I did know,
but that's maybe because the grown-ups aren't there.
Possibly. A Cat actually calls him a bud twice, which is probably a record, Yeah, it's probably because.
And what's interesting in this scene is they do that whole thing, don't they, of when they say, oh, I'm Lister and Crichton and we're old shipmates, they don't kind of say, no, you're not, because our shipmates are just about to come in.
Yeah, it's kind of odd. I mean, you would think, I mean, wouldn't you, that being Crichton at least, they would recognise as, very similar to the person they know as their shipmate. You would think they would say that instead of just being like, and Lister, is dressed similarly to New Alternate Lister. You would think they would, at least be like, okay, you look a bit like our shipmates, but you are not our shipmates, rather than, where the hell have you come for? We've never seen anything like you before in our lives,
I mean, I guess you could argue that at this point in the show, they've had, the polymorph and they've had dimension jump. So the idea of Cat and Rimmer that these people might not be, or they seem that they could be polymorphs in disguise, or Gelfs, like Camille was, or even they've met Ace at this point, that they could be from, as Rimmer says, some weird alternate dimension. But
I mean, it does. I mean, obviously, it does make sense for alternate Cat and Rimmer to be suspicious. I mean, definitely. Yeah, of course. When Rimmer says that they want to do weird things to us, we all know what Rimmer's thinking, don't we?
oh, we know. Rimmer, you're so transparent.
I'm not even going to mention it because I'm pretty sure everybody knows what I'm talking about. So whatever. Of course.
But yes, I do like alternate Lister and Crichton as well. I think that was some good casting.
Yeah. I mean, apparently, alternate Lister was a friend of Craig's. So I mean, yeah, it was good that they got someone who could believably be an alternate version of Lister. And of course,
I like the story.
Sorry.
Oh, I was gonna say, I like the story that Hattie tells about that she was driving Craig and Jake Abraham, who plays alternate Lister, home that night, and she got pulled over for speeding.
Yeah.
And the policeman who actually pulled them over was a Red Dwarf fan, and she managed to get away without a ticket because he was so thrilled to have met Holly and Lister and other Lister.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. That is so nice, because I mean, to be honest, I think people forget these days, that I mean, well, if you didn't live through 90s as I did, there was a time when Red Dwarf was a very cool episode, a very cool series amongst young people. It really was very, very well known. I mean, not that it's not well known now, but it's less well known. So I mean.
Yeah, no, in its heyday it was massive, and but yeah, that story just makes me laugh every time I think about it.
Yeah. Okay, let me see. Yeah, moving on. Of course. Oh yeah, we've got to give a shout out to Lister's spot on way of proving that he knows who Rimmer is. The Fiona Bountain speech.
Yes, that's again. It's like, Rimmer, why would you tell anyone that story?
I don't know. It must have been a very, very, very boring night, or I don't know. Maybe he talked about it in his sleep or something. I mean, who knows?
Yeah, but, just that whole speech that Lister goes on, and at the end of it, Rimmer actually surprisingly looks quite cowed.
Yeah, he basically sort of agrees with Kat. That okay, yes, he has got a hand on you there.
And then Cat comes in with the Trans Am wheel arch nostrils.
Yeah. Which apparently for this room at least is the first time he's heard that, because he's like, "What did you just call me?" Yeah.
Obviously, Trans Ams was still a thing in the future.
Possibly, yes. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Going back to New Lister and Crichton, I was thinking, given that they basically seem exactly the same as our versions, I mean, is there some way in which they differ, or is it more a question of the Inquisitor will come back, that he'll give them time to prove themselves, and then he'll come back to them?
Yeah, you do wonder, don't you? They don't seem to have done anything really very different from our original versions. So what kind of was the point?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's just, I mean, obviously it works, because if they were dramatically different, it would be well, it'll probably take the episode into areas that it doesn't want to go. It wants to have a cool chase scene and a cool action sequence. It doesn't want to get too deep about this kind of thing, I suppose.
It would have been very interesting to have a kind of a Lister and a Crichton come in who were very obviously superior in some sort of way.
Yeah, I
But
mean, I
I
suppose
suppose there
you could
wasn't the
say
time to
like
explore
maybe
it.
like the Kochansky's crew in series 7 or something. Yeah. Mm.
Or even just like the Thomas Alban guy at the beginning who comes back with a bow tie.
Yes. Now that would be funny.
No,
Yeah.
nothing says success in life like a bow tie, does it?
True. True. Before we get yeah. So yeah, of course, then we get sort of the alternate crew are going to put them in the brig, but then of course the Inquisitor loses patience and shows that he's quite willing to murder random people who are getting in his way. He doesn't really have any more limits whatsoever.
Yeah, that all kind of goes out the window the moment he's defied. But as well, I just want to make a note as well. There's that line of the two listers in the lift where he says that thing about we were shot from the same gun barrel, and just the imagery of that always just makes me go, "Wow."
Yeah. Of course, he would latch on to the the sperms that never made it rather than the unfertilized eggs, because well, he's talking from a male perspective, a cis male perspective written by cis men. So there you go.
But again, just tying into, if you want to be really kind of deep about it, and I'm sure it's not that deep, but just tying in with the kind of violent themes of the episode,
Yeah, well, actually that is a good point.
weapons imagery.
This is a pretty violent episode. I mean, of course, we will not get onto later bits until we get onto them, but we have not yet finished with the violence and the macho posturing and so on. But we'll get to that in due course. But before we do that, of course, there's the Inquisitor chases them, murders alternate Lister and Crichton, and then of course Lister is like, "Oh my god, that's horrible!" And hold on, I can use this. Which is,
Yeah, no, I think there's a sort of, maybe, I don't know if it was intentional or not, but there's a callback to this in series 7 in Epideme, where Kachansky uses Caroline Carmen's arm
yeah,
to
I think I remember
trick Epideme.
yeah, I mean, so yeah, I mean, maybe Kochansky and
There's a bit there of like mother, like son.
yeah, but they have at least one thing in common. They're not squeamish about dismembered limbs.
Yeah, and I've said it sort of before on, I don't know if it was on Tumblr or on Discord or whatever, but I know sort of for a lot of people that Lister and Kachansky, they don't really ship it, and it's a bit of a no TP, what with the whole thing of her being his mother. But I maintain that having two people together who aren't afraid to hack limbs off a corpse, they'd be a power couple. You
Would, yeah, I mean, I must admit, I'm one of the ones who doesn't really ship, but I mean, it's not like it doesn't, make me, sort of want to throw up or anything, I mean, it doesn't bother me that much, I mean, because to be honest, I can't really take the she's his mum revelation seriously, because it's just so bizarre that out of left field, I just can't take it seriously, it's just but yeah, I don't really ship them together because the way they're written is it's almost to discourage shipping, to be honest. Chloe's version, that is. So I mean, but yeah, I mean, I'm not as opposed to it as some people are. Yeah.
But yeah, I did wonder if that was like a little bit of a callback to that with the
Could have been
she
you
whips out the amputated arm and she's like, Crichton.
could have been now you mention it, I mean, because Epideme is probably Chloe's Kochansky's best episode, to be honest, because she settled into the crew, and she gets to be badass in this episode, and come up with a plan to save Lisa's life. And then of course series 8 comes along, but let's not mention that.
Yeah, let's not.
Yeah,
But yeah, going back to the episode in question, Craig and Robert doing
very
this
good
whole
episode,
scene
yeah.
with the, "Oh, sir, you've got it in your jacket,"
Oh
and
yeah.
shut up.
It's so adorable there. I think actually the cast in the audio commentaries, Robert it might be, says something about Craig looking like a cheeky schoolboy there, and it's exactly spot on.
Yeah, and just so incongruous with what's happening as well.
It's just, like so perky and cheerful, and oh come on, get over it. I got us through the door, didn't I? Come on, let's go.
Just ignore the severed hand inside my coat.
Yes, yeah, this is a great is a great episode for Lister. He does get a lot to do. He gets to be the hero and so on. So I mean, it's great. So I mean, yeah.
Again, I think this scene is one of those ones that, again, it's just such a different thing for Lister, that it's that survival mode kicking in, and it's one of those things that we so rarely see in the show, that he's normally the soft one and the emotional one, and he is, you do see the tough side of him as well.
Sorry, I mean, I was just going to say, just one episode before this, we've seen him, openly weeping at a romantic film, and and the contrast with that and this, it's amazing, really.
As we do see the tough side of him as well, sort of fairly frequently within the show. But this is one of those episodes where it actually kind of goes even further with that. And that whole scene that we're going to come to at the end with the Inquisitor, that shows us not just a kind of a tough side and a survival side, but actually a side that could veer darker than anybody expects.
Yes, we'll definitely get to that. But just before we do, let's carry on in chronological order, which is, of course, we get to the bit where Lister and Crichton are stuck together, chained together, and they're trying to get through the chains. And of course, we get this lovely, very sort of endearing to me anyway scene where it's established that Crichton does not believe in Silicon Heaven any longer.
No, and yeah, the leg jiggling intensifies.
Yeah, it's just I just love the way it's it's such a tense situation, but it's so funny. I mean, there is actually a deleted scene, where it's sort of seeded a bit more, where Rimmer actually reminds him, Crichton, there was a page in your manual saying that you're fitted with a chip for a belief in Silicon Heaven, and Crichton actually retorts, well, it was put there to test our faith, So I mean that probably, but that got cut, But I mean, I think it still works without the sort of setup, Of course, I mean, we still we remember from Camille the last day, the Silicon Heaven concept, So I mean, it still works within the scene. I think, It's just
What's good about this scene? What's great about this scene, and again, I don't know if this was a deliberate intention on the part of the writers, but what we see in this scene is actually both of them displaying the characteristics that, if they'd had the self-awareness, would have saved them from the Inquisitor. So Crichton obviously says to him, while he's being judged, that the only way a mechanoid could be worthy is if he broke his programming and attempted to live at a set of values he'd arrived at independently. And this scene actually shows that he has reached that point. He can now lie and do those things.
It's just,
but he just didn't have.
He doesn't believe it himself yet, so that's why he was found wanting. Yeah.
And similarly with Lister, is that obviously he had the thing that he doesn't feel that he's lived a worthwhile life and doesn't feel like he's achieved anything. But then he says to Crichton in this scene, I taught you to do this. I gave you a life to lose, and just that revelation that actually he cared enough to do that, and he put that effort in to do that and achieved that, surely on its own would have been enough to have said that actually he'd done something worthwhile with his life. But neither of them recognise that within themselves.
It's very interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think in Lister's case at least, I still kind of doubt that even if he had realised that he would have said that to an Inquisitor, simply because he was, against the entire concept of being judged. But I mean, that doesn't take away from the point at all. I mean, you're absolutely right.
Yes, and now we sort of get into the kind of the last part of the episode, don't we? Of the plan and the showdown and all the rest of it.
Yeah, the plan. Yeah. So we get the bit where they sort of lure the Inquisitor out of hiding. Basically, they wait for him to attack, and then he does something. He sort of turns Lister first very young, and then a lot older, and I mean, I don't have much to say about this, except it's a bit of a bugbear of mine. Older man, couldn't they have found someone who could plausibly be an older version of Craig? Because I'm sorry, he's not.
The thing that bugs me is that he steps out from behind the boxes and they stare at each other, and then he starts fiddling with the gauntlet. And I'm like, dude, could you not have programmed it before you like stepped right out into the line of sight?
Yeah, I mean, it's not the best choreographed showdown ever, but I think they make up for it in the next bit, where of course, okay, let's just move on to the bit that we've been wanting to talk about for the entire episode, probably, but which is the bit where
I do want to give a shout out to Crichton's "Today's been a bit of a bummer, hasn't
yes,
it?"
before we do, yes, that is a great line. The way he delivers it, sort of matter of fact, the way he delivers it. I mean, he could have been saying, "Oh, it's not very nice weather today, is it, sir?"
It's just another day in their life, isn't it? Of everything going wrong that can go
they're
wrong.
already getting to that stage where it's just another day in the life. But anyway, yeah. So moving on to this very cool sequence where Lister dangles the unconscious Inquisitor over a chasm, and and I have got to point out. I've been holding on to this since Dimension Jump. The shroot that he smokes is very obviously Ace's shroot. Because in Dimension Jump, at the end of Dimension Jump, they smoke together, and then Ace leaves his packet of shroots behind. We actually see Lister pick it up, and it's the last one. So Lister was obviously holding on to that last shroot for a badass heroic moment, so he could channel Ace.
Yes, very much so. And yeah, I think that's a great little nod back as well. And I mean, I know it's been sort of, kind of talked about before, but for when our Rimmer goes off to become Ace, it's been kind of talked a lot about that a lot of what the Ace that he would want to be would be quite a lot of reflection of Lister in terms of the moral code and everything else.
Mm.
So yeah, I think that's just a nice little callback that there's that link there.
It is, yeah. I mean, I only recently noticed it, actually. I mean, I only because it's not focused on at the end of Dimension Jump. You can easily miss it if you're looking elsewhere. But it is definitely there. So I mean, I like to think that when Doug remembered it and decided and thought, oh, hold on, we can put this subtle little thing in. I mean, yeah. Mm-hmm. Of course,
Yeah, this whole scene is fantastic, and I think this is one of those things that because there's so much going on in series 5 and so much good stuff that it's been slept on a bit, but Craig's performance in this scene, and I think actually just through this episode, is probably one of the finest performances he's ever given in the show, because it's so multi-layered and so magnetic. And I think it's just absolutely fabulous.
Well, I mean, I completely agree. I mean, it's a wonderful performance. I mean, all more so because you do actually believe for a second, that he is going to let the Inquisitor plunge to his death. I mean, you do actually for a second believe that. I mean, and let's face it, the audience probably wouldn't blame him if he did. But we know that is not what Lister is like. So I mean, it's. Which which makes it all more impressive that he manages to convince you for a second that is actually what he's going to do.
And I think as well, there's this inference there of, like I said earlier, that we've seen Lister being tough before, and we've seen him being scrappy, but this is probably one of the only times, certainly within this part of the show, that we've seen a side of him that could be darker than he's ever let on. And this is where we kind of see the Lister who grew up, in that tough neighborhood, who survived, the horrible orphanage and all the rest of it. And this is probably, I would say, one of the only times in the show that we maybe see a glimpse of the Lister who we could have got in Last Human, of the evil Lister
was thinking
who,
that. I mean,
became a
I
psychopath.
actually wonder whether this was what put the idea into Doug's head, of an evil Lister, seeing Craig's performance here, and thinking, well, the potential is there.
Yeah. And it's so understated as well. It's, everything about it is very calm and very measured, but that threat there is just so palpable in that moment when he's, the Inquisitor challenges and says, I've seen in your heart and you don't have it in you, and he's like, bet your life.
Yeah, actually, it's occurring to me. Obviously, that I'm a pretty big fan of the Sebastian Doyle incarnation, and I've always thought it's a shame that we never really get to see Craig play him. We all we get is a list of thinking he is. But come to think of it, he kind of plays him here a bit, doesn't he? I mean, or at least how he could have been a little bit, kind of sort of ruthlessness,
Yeah. And I say there's just it's so understated, the whole thing. And then when he does actually pull him up and the Inquisitor confronts him and sort of says about, well, your plan wouldn't have worked because you wouldn't have existed to threaten me in the first place. And he's like, that's a point. And it's like, obviously we know that, this is all kind of going according to his plan and everything, but he just downplays it so kind of like, oh really? And it's so kind of convincing.
Yeah, I mean, you really do think, I mean, it really is convincing, Oh God, I didn't think of that, In fact, it's quite reminiscent of well, this whole episode. I used to be honest, I used to get a bit confused with Justice because it has very similar, sort of being chased around dark areas of the ship by a stimulant kind of thing, But also this bit, where I lied twice, But of course it's slightly different here because here Lister is completely on top of the situation, He's anticipated everything, whereas back in Justice he hadn't anticipated quite everything, But he still got out of it.
And again, in a slightly kind of different way. And again, we've seen it through sort of bits and pieces of the show. But again, this is one of the sort of major times that the show kind of establishes Lister as being the brains of the outfit, isn't it? That we've kind of seen him sort of come up with solutions to stuff before. That, in series 3, he starts to take a bit more responsibility. In series 4, he starts to take a little bit more of a leadership role.
Yeah,
but yeah, this episode where actually he comes up with the plan and he's the one who, at this point the other 3 are dead. It all hangs on him to fix this. And he does it.
Exactly, yeah. I meant to say actually when we were talking about Holoship, but maybe it fits better here. Of course, we get Rimmer in Holoship, grandstanding to the captain and co, claiming that he's been an ineffective commander Red Dwarf, and we know that Rimmer is bullshitting, but I mean. It's not clear to what extent he's bullshitting. I mean, does he believe it to some extent himself? For me, because I find it hard to believe that he can actually believe it. Well, because I mean, when we actually see when whenever the crew get in trouble, Lister is the one who takes the lead. I mean, we see it in Demons and Angels, for instance. So I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether Rimmer actually genuinely believes that he is in charge of Red Dwarf or not. I mean, but if he
wants to believe it.
no, he wants to believe. But I mean, deep down, I don't really think he can believe it. Because he, it's staring him in the face who the natural leader is here. It's just Lister is not the kind of person to throw his weight around, and demand that people respect his authority. He just sees that somebody needs to take the lead here. Okay, it's going to be me. Because I'm the because it has to be because Rimmer's an intangible hologram or whatever. So it's just.
I think we see sort of more in the Dave era.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just sort of fascinated by their different approaches to leadership.
I think certainly when we get to the Dave era, we see more acceptance by Rimmer of that he's more willing to sort of step back and let Lister take the driving seat.
Yeah, I mean, I think he still enjoys introducing himself as the acting senior officer, blah blah, etc. But I think you're right. He is more sort of resigned to the fact that that is actually not as relevant as he used to think it was, and yeah, it's just I find it
Certainly,
so
that scene in
fascinating.
the beginning.
I'm sorry, what was
That scene in the beginning where Lister delegates to Rimmer, and he's like, "Okay, well, you're going to sort this out."
that? I was genuinely
And
surprised. Yeah.
yeah, but he does it. He takes the order from Lister that Lister is delegating and says, "Right, this time it's on you. I'm not doing it."
It's really, I'd actually never thought of it in that light before. That is really interesting. Yeah, that is probably the best indication, of Rimmer accepting, that he is not actually the leader of this crew after all. Yeah, that is a very good point.
Interestingly, it's one of Rimmer's probably most triumphant moments.
The most heroic moments.
Yes,
Most heroic.
when he's finally most triumphant and
Yeah,
heroic
triumphant. Yeah,
moments.
yeah,
Yeah,
triumphant. Yeah, sorry. Well,
yeah.
definitely. Yeah, And it's a very satisfying moment, because obviously, Lister is behind him all the way, and even the rest of the crew are behind him to some extent, So it's a very very good, satisfying episode, for people who love Rimmer, I do include myself in that, It's not a question of not liking Rimmer; it's just a question of preferring Lister, basically.
And as well, the scene in there where he tells them his plan, but it's only when Lister says, "Yeah, all right, we're going with the plan," that it's decided, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, he looks dismayed. He looks dismayed, when Lister says it's crap, and then but then finally sort of manages to muster enough conviction, to get Lister to say, oh yeah, okay, we're gonna go with it then, So yeah, you're right. I mean, ultimately, he knows Rimmer knows, that then the crew aren't going to go with his plan, if Lister doesn't say yes. So it's very interesting actually. I'd never thought of it in that of the beginning in that light before.
He's got to convince the boss.
Exactly. Yes. It's just a very interesting sort of progression over the course of Red Dwarf as a series. Okay. Well, we're closing in on the hour mark, but so I guess do you have more to say on? I mean, on how awesome this episode is regarding Lister's character, because we got a bit of time.
I'll be quiet now. I've said enough.
Okay, fair enough. So yeah, the plot. I mean, the plot. I think it makes sense to a certain extent. But I've always thought it. I mean, it is weird how Rimmer and Cat return at the end, and they're wearing the outfits of their alternate counterparts rather than the ones they were wearing at the start. Kind of odd.
Yeah, it's never really explained what happens to them, is it, between, being sort of vanished by the Inquisitor after the judgments and then when they come back through the door afterwards. And sort of, I think the explanation is that they've been in some sort of alternate timeline, haven't they, from that morning, maybe?
Assume so. They must have been. Yeah, because I it's easier for me to think of the alternate crew as distinct alternate people rather than the same people who've been slightly marginally changed. Because thinking of it that way gives me a headache. So I think our original Cat and Rimmer must have been in some sort of limbo. Whilst all these shenanigans were going on, and then they get returned.
My assumption is that when the Inquisitor changed the timeline and removed our Lister and Crichton, that maybe a different decision was made that morning as to what they were going to do that day. Hence why they didn't go out on Starbug and they put on different clothes. And yeah, that's why things were different.
To some extent. We're getting into kind of territory where I try not to think about it too much, or it gives me a headache. But I think that is a good explanation.
We can explain it away.
Yeah. Okay. I think we've covered almost everything except the scores out of 10 for both overall quality and for slashiness.
So I'm not going to give this episode a 10 out of 10 just because I think it's not my favourite episode ever, but it's one of them. And so it is quite dark. And I think there's a lot still to be explored in it. And the continuity, as you say, in places doesn't really make sense. But I'm going to give it a 9.5 because I think in terms of plot and performances, and certainly I say that scene where they're all sort of judging themselves, I think is absolutely superb. So I'm going to give it a 9.5 for that.
Okay.
In terms of slashiness, I don't know. Maybe a 6. They don't spend. It's a Lister and Crichton episode, isn't it, rather than a Lister and Rimmer one?
True, yes.
But I do enjoy that scene of Lister sort of showing how much he knows Rimmer.
Yeah, well, we're thinking along very similar lines. I've given it for slashiness 5 out of 10. I mean, that's for the Lister, the scene you mentioned where Lister shows just how well he knows him, and also Rimmer's worry about weird things being done to him, because it just amuses me. And I promise, listeners, we do not consult about these scores beforehand. They're completely random, but it so happens that overall, I have also given this episode 9.5 out of 10. It's an excellent, wonderful episode, but it's not quite up there with certain other episodes which I have, or I'm going to later on give 10 out of 10. But it's very high up there. It's a wonderful episode. So yeah, there we go.
It's not a feel-good episode, and I think maybe that's why I've held back a half a
That
point.
is probably it. Yeah, it's not one of those episodes where you start feeling all warm inside, like for instance the last day. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we're done now. So that wraps up this episode of Smeg and the Femmes. Thank you to Hologamet for technical help, and also thank you to my guest Feline Ranger. It's been a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
Okay, listeners, if you'd like to give us feedback, you can do so on Tumblr or Discord, on the posts where I'll be linking to this episode when it's posted. You can also email us at smegandthefemmes@gmail.com. My customary announcement regarding our new YouTube channel. If you're looking for older episodes, we're now archiving them on YouTube, so just search for Smeg and the Femmes on YouTube, and you will find the earlier episodes there. And the next episode we'll be covering is the rather, how shall I put this, fan-pleasing Terraform. I hope you'll join us then. But for now, goodbye.